So now, moving on, the 8-mark question. Now, once you've answered the 12-mark question, have a read of this. This is very, very, very simple. So, examine measures that the government, might use to restrict the monopsony power of supermarkets, which is pretty much very similar to what we've just answered, so you can really bang this out quite quickly. So one measure the government could use is regulation. So like we know, with the application as well, so a bit of application here as well, they find them 1% of their annual revenue, 1% of annual. And yeah, that is literally just structure it in a KA sense. And for the 8-mark question, you only really need 1 point. And if you want to go into depth with this point, that's completely fine. But now, just thinking about it, measures the government can use to restrict monopsony power of supermarkets. A really good thing with monopsonies is actually very similar to monopolies. And what is a strategy we learn about to reduce the monopoly power in markets? So there's monopoly power. How do you define a monopoly? So a legal monopoly is a firm with more than 25% market share. A pure monopoly is a firm with 100% market share. So basically the problem in monopolies is that there's not enough firms in the market. Therefore, there's usually one dominant incumbent firm and it exploits consumers. And pretty much the same thing works in monopsonies. So one way we can restrict the monopsony power of supermarkets is allow competition. Introduce competition in the supermarket industry. As if there's more firms in the supermarket industry, these food suppliers have more options to sell to. And if there's more options, if there's lots of different supermarkets, it means that the degree of monopsony power will greatly be reduced. As now, if Tesco's offering a stupidly low price, these suppliers, if you remember back to the extract actually, if you look at this, the last line, many food suppliers are reluctant to complain of fear of losing contracts with supermarkets, but this is why it works so well. But if they increase entrance, more competition in the market, it means that, like I said, if Tesco offers them a stupidly low price, they can say no to Tesco and go to one of the maybe 20 new supermarkets that will offer them a decent price. Therefore, like I said, it will reduce their monopsony power and therefore mean that, like I said, will restrict the monopsony power of supermarkets. I just want to emphasise, you only need to do one of these points, just structure it in a KA sense and then just write one little evaluation point, and that is more than enough for 8 marks. But it's really good and I would 100% encourage doing this as you're practicing, you're revising with exam questions. This is exactly how it's going to be asked in the actual exam, so if you can practice, just brainstorm ideas with exam questions. Yeah, you won't need 1 point for 8 marker, but if whilst you're revising, it's a really good revision activity. But yeah, third one, another point I can think of, how can the government restrict monopsony power? So the problem is that these firms, the supermarkets, are paying the suppliers, the food suppliers, too low of a price. Now, what is a strategy? What is something the government can do to stop supermarkets paying the suppliers such a low price? It's the same strategy you would use in negative externalities to stop someone buying cigarettes, for example, in negative externalities questions. And there's lots of different strategies, but one of them is minimum prices, and here that works really well as well. So if you set a minimum price, so minimum price that suppliers can pay that supermarkets can pay these food suppliers, it means that it will really restrict, it will reduce the degree to which supermarkets have this monopsony power. And of course, if you don't want minimum prices, please do make sure to draw the diagram. Why? Because it's so simple. It will literally take you about 10 seconds to draw out price, quantity, minimum price. Remember, minimum price is always above the equilibrium. Why is it above the equilibrium? Because you want to increase the price that the supermarkets want to pay suppliers. If it's below the equilibrium, it does not make sense. Okay, so just label up the points on the diagram. Nice little diagram, and straight away, by looking at this, we have 2 valuation points at the end. How could you use this diagram to evaluate now? So we've said that a minimum price will restrict the monopsony power, but then also what happens in a minimum price? What is the difference between QD and QS now? That is excess supply, which means that you could say, however, in evaluation, this depends on the negative effects of the minimum price, as the minimum price will lead to excess supply by food suppliers. And what is that? Excess supply of food suppliers is wastage. Therefore, it means that there's going to be wastage of food. Therefore, it's going to be a misallocation of resources. You can even, if you really wanted to, you don't need to at all, by the way, here. It's only 2 marks of evaluation, so that will be completely fine. But just to get your brain sparking, you can link that to government failure, saying that, and that would be an example of government failure because the government has intervened in the market trying to improve the allocation of resources, but actually led to worsen allocation of resources. And just think about a few more evaluation points. For regulation, very simple one. Regulatory capture depends on whether the regulators fall in, they may become fond of the firm they're regulating, therefore reduce the degree to which they actually regulate, like these firms like Tesco. With increased competition, I think a really good evaluation point would just be you could just evaluate the lack of monopsony power. It means that if now, supermarkets no longer have this monopsony power, they're paying higher prices to the food suppliers, it means that supermarkets' costs are going to rise. This could lead to, and this is probably going to lead to, higher costs for consumers, therefore reduction in consumer welfare, and you can pretty much write that for any of them. But yeah, like I said, evaluation there is very simple. This 8 market is very simple. Just make sure KA, and the biggest thing here pretty much, get it done in 8 minutes. And since the 12 marker we did before this is very similar to the 8 marker, I would even say you can get this done in like 5, 6, 7 minutes. Definitely you can save a bit of time here with the 8 mark question.